This video is about a crime scene. It's about a fraud in Luckin Coffee that got exposed by short sellers, and I will talk a little bit about my personal opinion on Luckin Coffee. I will talk about the bigger picture about short selling. I will go on and talk about Elon Musk and Tesla and what it's got to do with short selling and my personal experience with that, and talk about how big money is involved in this and give you some thoughts about that. So stay tuned for that, and thank you for watching. If you enjoy that, please watch it till the end and also give it a like because this really helps us to grow this kind of a channel. And if you are a subscriber, you already know that Miriam made videos before on the business model of Luckin Coffee and also the fraud allegations before everything that just happened. So if you haven't seen those videos before, go and watch them. If you have seen them and you're back, thank you so much for coming back. Always make sure to subscribe to our channel if you care about news and our thoughts about the tech scene in China, startups in China, and also some investments related to that. On that note, also my disclaimer that none of this in this video is financial advice. I'm just telling you my personal opinion and my experience of trading some of those stocks and securities involved in this video. So I'm not advising anybody to buy, sell or hold those kind of securities, and you basically need to manage your own risk and make up your own mind. I guess most of you have heard what happened to Luckin Coffee stock, the Chinese Starbucks competitor from China last week. That's why you are here. And yeah, obviously Luckin Coffee got exposed finally by the short sellers. So they have been right on the notion that Luckin Coffee is cooking the books and making up some sales numbers. And last week Luckin Coffee was kind of forced to go and publish a SEC filing saying that they have to launch an internal investigation into their financials, and thereby all of the reporting that we have seen so far is basically summed up as not trustworthy anymore. And based on that, obviously the share price is plunged minus 80%. So if you're new to Luckin Coffee, go and watch Miriam's video on the business model. I'm not going deep into that anymore in this video, but I will give a quick summary of what happened regarding the stock price of Luckin Coffee. The fraud allegations against Luckin Coffee, they are not new. They have been out since the end of January when Muddy Waters, which are like, they call themselves research-driven short seller, went public by publishing an anonymous report, so a report that somebody made in China, possibly sending them to them, and announced that they are now shorting. That means betting on Luckin Coffee stock to fall, and thereby, if it falls, making a profit. And they announced it publicly and published this anonymous report, which has been out for a while. It's been a couple of pages, and they make different allegations in this report, which initially have been denied by Luckin Coffee themselves. So if you watch their investor relations, you can see that on February 3rd, Luckin Coffee also made another SEC filing in which they said that those allegations are wrong. They looked into it. They cannot find any substantial information in the report about fake numbers and all of those allegations in the report. And when the report came out, initially the stock tanked around 20%, but then in the recent days, Luckin Coffee was kind of once again rising, because investors were kind of happy with the response of Luckin Coffee. And we didn't know if those kind of allegations would come out to be true in the end. So in this anonymous report, which talks about some smoking gun evidence about how they observed Luckin Coffee on the ground in China, and they went to the shops and made video photography. I think more than 11,000 hours of video footage. They actually went and got some receipts, customer receipts from the bin, thereby composing a report about how they say that the information that they found doesn't match with the books of Luckin Coffee. So they said 69% of products have been inflated. In Q4, even more, around 88%. And they said they looked into more than 25,000 of the customer receipts and found that the prices were overstated. And they also mentioned that it's at least suspicious that the founders of Luckin Coffee have sold a substantial amount of their shares in the company. So those have been the allegations against Luckin Coffee. And what happened now is, now with this SEC filing by Luckin Coffee, they basically announced themselves that they found similar evidence within Luckin Coffee. So basically the allegations of this Muddy Waters anonymous report have been correct, it seems. So they're basically announcing that Jian Liu, which is the CEO of Luckin Coffee, is part of inflating those numbers, also part of a bigger team that is seemingly involved in this kind of fraud of making the numbers bigger than they actually were. And they are now welcoming new board members and also making an external investigation by third parties. So they hired FTI Consulting as well as Kirkland and Ellis to launch an investigation into their actual numbers, and also announcing that every number that they have published in their earning reports are basically not to be trusted right now. So obviously investors jumped the ship and the share price tanked 80% and wiped out around 6 billion in market cap in a very short amount of time. And obviously this also had effects on me because I own a couple of Luckin Coffee shares. I announced it in my video about my personal challenge of investing 1,000 euros in the Chinese stock market, that I bought some shares in Luckin Coffee. And obviously because I'm following Luckin Coffee and I own a small amount in Luckin Coffee shares, which I announced in the video about my 1,000 euros stock challenge in which I invest in Chinese companies, even though I knew about what was written in the short seller report. And I want to use this in order to broaden up the space here a little bit and talk more about what is going on in the world of short sellers, and also my personal experience in that, because this has also a lot to do about Tesla stock and Elon Musk. I became an early investor in Tesla stock, and as you may know, Tesla has always been in the news because there's many people betting against Tesla that the business model is not viable, that it's just another fraud. They called Elon Musk out for fraud, and there is obviously lots of people that are publicly announcing that they are trading against Tesla, basically betting that it will go to zero and providing also the evidence for that. So a little bit similar to what Muddy Waters is doing, publicly announcing that they're shorting a stock because they think there is fraud going on. And then usually those kind of parties, they publish a lot of news around what they think is going wrong with this company in order to provide also some evidence on what's going on. And we see this happening with stocks of companies that are either startups that are financially weak, that have a business model that is very fragile at the moment, or stocks that are that need a very big growth momentum in order to actually achieve the numbers and, for instance, get new funding and so on, because those kind of stocks are very volatile and vulnerable to negative news. So on such kind of a smaller piece of negative news, it's possible that those kind of stocks tank dramatically, let's say 5 to 10 or 15% even. And you find such kind of short sellers everywhere. Sometimes they're even here in my YouTube comments. So some people say like, Tesla is fraud, Luckin Coffee is fraud, calling out different names, how their business models don't work and so on. And you find them a lot on Twitter or FinTwits, and also some of those short sellers actually happen to publish some reports which are picked up by the big media and thereby published and become very well known. So my personal experience to that dates back to when I started invested in Tesla, and I took some early stake in Tesla, and I think particularly 2019 has been a really tough year on me in terms of Tesla, because my position was really down a lot during this time. This is when Model 3 has just been launched, and it wasn't sure if there is demand at all for Model 3. And I was doing a lot of research, for instance, on Twitter, and also reading a lot of tweets of short sellers who have been publishing, photos of Model 3s parked on some parking lots, claiming that there are unsold inventory, They published news about how Tesla is building the cars in a tent and so on. So basically making a lot of fear, uncertainty and doubt about Tesla, and thereby also, publicly announcing that they're short on the stock, so they will earn money once the stock price goes down. And not only was this a personal experience of, being invested in a stock that was brought down, but that time maybe artificially, but it's a market, so the truth will always come out, and in that way, for that time the sentiment was very negative on Tesla. But it also turned into a very personal experience because I'm always in China, because of the work that I'm doing. The story at that time evolved around Giga factory Shanghai, on which there are big media reports, which I show you here, of people that are claiming that Shanghai Gigafactory will never come to life. Tesla doesn't have the money, Model 3 will have no demand, and so on. So basically people were claiming that this is just a field of mud by the beginning of January 2019, and Tesla is just pumping out positive news and trying to make an artificial growth story. So because I was in China in summer 2019, I actually decided to go for myself and go to the Gigafactory in Shanghai to see it with my own eyes, what's currently happening there. So in this context, I met Chao, who is a Chinese guy living in Shanghai and who is going to the Gigafactory in Shanghai very often and publishing information about what is going on the ground. He's flying the drone and so on. And really interesting to talking to him on the way of going to Gigafactory Shanghai, because he told me how he actually was approached by bigger media from the West, by some people from Wall Street, who are actually telling them, who actually tried to tell him what kind of information he should spread on Twitter in order to let Tesla be in a negative way, viewed in a negative way.
On tweet, some people they are
Twitter?
they are boss.
Yeah.
They're both in China.
Yeah.
They have the research company
Yeah.
for to make the research document for people in the Wall Street.
And on the way to the Gigafactory with Chao, it was really interesting to talk with him about his personal experience, how he actually got approached by people from Wall Street, people from Western media to talk about Gigafactory in Shanghai, and actually sharing also some of the negative information about the Gigafactory in Shanghai. So it's really interesting to see how the bigger news and media play out a role in this entire game around the stock. And so what happened is that when I arrived at the Gigafactory in Shanghai, because I was talking in Chinese with the migrant workers there, and they told me by what time of date the factory should be finished. When we went there, we could already see that the building was up. But what I discovered new at that day was that there was already machinery placed inside of the factory. Because I'm German, I also could read that it's actually machinery of a German company, Bosch, which has some automotive equipment as well, and also some heating equipment by that point in time. And I made some videos about it and a photo and published it on Twitter. And by that time, people were still, making up stories how Gigafactory in Shanghai will never finish, and how maybe, the construction is ongoing, but they won't have the money to place some equipment inside, and there will never be a Model 3 coming out of the factory in 2019. But then my tweet kind of got lots of traction. First of all, it got picked up by Teslarati, a Tesla magazine, and also lots of people who are doing research into Tesla stock, as I did. They found it quite useful information, and in the end the tweet obviously also exploded and got huge exposure when Elon Musk personally liked it with his account, and thereby obviously getting lots of attention. And afterwards, after I made this tweet, it was really interesting to see that I also got approached by some anonymous accounts on Twitter that were, sharing some fabricated information with me of how there were sheets of papers hanging outside of Gigafactory, claiming that we are spreading false information around Tesla or the Gigafactory in Shanghai. So, and I spoke to this kind of persons in Chinese and on Twitter, and it seems like this is possibly a troll paid by possibly somebody shorting the stock who didn't like my information here, and thereby kind of trying to keep me informed that, well, there are some people watching me. So spinning this story back, this is just my personal story of how I also got this understanding and knowledge of what's going on in the markets, and how interest groups and very big money and some short selling mechanisms can actually have huge outcomes on how the stock is trading and what's happening in the markets. And if you haven't been aware of those kind of mechanisms, then you should really know about this, and possibly if you are not able to kind of rate this or to wrap your heads around it, then it's of course safer to invest in some of the less exposed stocks, because those kind of stocks, like for instance Tesla, NIO or Luckin Coffee, they usually have a exposure of up to 30% of the float of the shares that are being shorted. So that's why those kind of stocks are very volatile, and why obviously there is also some very controversial reporting around those stocks. And coming back to the Luckin Coffee case, well, it is definitely fraud, and there has been financial crime happening, and the numbers are inflated and blown up. That's what Luckin Coffee is saying now by themselves, and they claim it to be the COO, and well, the short sellers, they have called it out, and so it's their right to profit from that, because they have been calling it out and it's the truth. And luckily the markets will always turn to the truth in the long run, and that's the mechanisms that are ongoing. But we also need to know that those short sellers are making good money out of that, and it's their fair right. But I have obtained one screenshot of one of the short sellers who was betting against Luckin Coffee. So he is buying put options for Luckin Coffee would go down to $12 and $14 a share, and he made more than 477,000 US dollars in profits on that trade already. So this is insane, and this is the type of money and bets that are involved in such kind of stock trading options here. What's also interesting is that I also launched a new channel on TikTok where I do some short videos about investments in China, but also just some news about China and what's going on in the markets. And I also talked about Luckin Coffee there, and it's interesting to see that one day before the news was out, there was one guy commenting on my video and it was basically saying, watch the news today. And this was before the SEQ filing was out, and I wrote with him later on in a private message after everything happened, and was asking him, so, well, how did you know that this kind of information will come out and the shares will drop 80%? And he told me, well, he's got a friend trading in Thailand at the stock exchanges, and he wouldn't reply to me if this friend is, possibly betting on Luckin Coffee to go down or anything like that. But it's super fishy that this kind of information got out somewhere before actually it was announced officially by the company out there by the SEQ filing. So you see that there are some personal interests around there. There's people who know more than you do and than I do, and those kind of people are possibly making a shitloads of money in such kind of trades and such kind of crashes. So this is the bigger picture of short selling and people calling companies a fraud, or maybe even betting against those companies, or calling out their business model and the financials. And I think you should just be aware of this and all of this that is going on. And in the case of Luckin Coffee, once again, this has been obviously turned out to be the truth. But I have the feeling that actually this chapter is not closed yet. I think the book will continue to be written. So I want to share you my views and an outline of what I am thinking will now happen to Luckin Coffee. So the bottom line for Luckin Coffee right now and the situation is that basically all of the trust is gone, because Luckin Coffee obviously day before that day said the allegations are not true, and now it comes out that they are true. And so how can you trust this company or the management anymore? And as Miriam already pointed out in her video before, there have been those kind of rumors around the management team already, and obviously also the fraud allegations report and so on. It would have been good for the management to actually come out and face those allegations publicly and in a better way that they have actually done before. But what does it mean now to Luckin Coffee? Will it go to zero, or is the business over? Well, I think it depends really a lot on what the management will be doing or what will be the outcome of this investigation. And if they're actually able to kind of re-establishing the trust into the company, which will be a very, very difficult thing to do. On the other hand, it's not all black. There is always black and white, and there's also things that are happening. Just before the crash, I pointed out how the growth numbers in the social media search, so I analyzed the WeChat traffic of Luckin Coffee, was actually rising again after the corona crisis. And there's now recently even reports out that after this crash, there's many people going to the Luckin Coffee shops and claiming the discounts that they still have, the coupon codes, and there is actually lots of new first-time users for Luckin Coffee. So even though there's no such thing as bad publicity, it seems, so people are actually having their first experience even now after this big crisis and big fraud and big crash. So you could now have different angles and views on re-evaluating the valuation of Luckin Coffee. For instance, the short sellers, they will go on and say it's a zero, it will go bankrupt, and they will use every bit of information they can use to bring it out in order to let the Luckin Coffee stock tank. On the other hand, there might be some people who are evaluating Luckin Coffee based on the case that, it's only the CEO who has been involved and his team. It's not been the CFO, so maybe it's has been a personal problem with the COO who has been under enormous pressure, obviously also partly due to the growth story which they made up, and also people betting against them. So he had to deliver those kind of revenue numbers in order to let Luckin Coffee exist the way it is. And maybe it was just his personal he maybe was the issue of the fraud, and he was the one who was reporting false numbers to the CFO. But how can you trust it? I mean, it could be that even the COO was involved together with the CFO and CEO, and they all knew about it. I think this is all still up to the outcome of the investigation that will be going on. And depending on this outcome, I think we can re-evaluate the actual worth of the Luckin Coffee stock. And so it seems like this fraud is dating back to after what happened on the IPO. So Ernst & Young, which have been the auditors, they actually verified that the numbers that Luckin Coffee published during the IPO, at which Luckin Coffee was priced at $17 a share, those numbers were not cooked. And so there are some people out there, and some of them even being very big hedge fund owners, like I'm showing here, who are saying, this might be what Luckin Coffee should be priced currently, because it was priced back then at this price with correct financials, and the stores, they are existing in China. So even though we need to cut down the revenues in half now, and thereby all of this growth story is gone, basically, it's inflated, it's a fraud. And we maybe need to bring down the multiple for the valuation. And personally, I'm really interested in how this story will continue to unfold. And I'm looking forward to what will be the news. I actually heard that next week there might be a earning call happening of Luckin Coffee, and we also may already see the outcome of the investigation with some first numbers. So that will be very interesting to watch. So I think the story will possibly go on, and as this hedge fund manager is pointing out, people are going to drink Luckin Coffee in China, there is some space for new players in this area. Actually, coffee is very expensive in China. At the same time, it's a very big growing market opportunity. And the Luckin Coffee shops, they are real and there is some fundamentals to the business. But as I pointed out during this video, there has been a fraud happening and now it's time for Luckin Coffee to come clean. And it's up to the management what will happen to the stock. Will it go to zero, or is there some time to get a new evaluation of what Luckin Coffee could be worth based on their real numbers once we have them? And will Luckin Coffee be finally go through those times and be able to switch the business model into a profitable business in years ahead of time? Meanwhile, depending on funding of investors, we will see. Exciting times, and I'm really interested in following it, and I hope you do as well. So please subscribe to our channel. If you enjoyed this kind of in-depth talk, please give it a like, and I hope to see you next time, maybe next week already, with an update on the numbers. See you then and have a great weekend.